Pam. Pam Haas is our second person to do one of these one-person shows. The first one was JJ. That was kind of an experiment, and he was good to experiment on, and it went great. We had a much smaller group at that point. We had to do it over in the admin building. After that, we looked at it and we said we'd like to do another one, and I talked to Pam, and she was gracious enough to agree that she would do it. We had seen some of her photographs that were in the shows earlier, and I'm wondering what he's waving at us about. And they were fabulous. So she has a great resume, which y'all can pick up out front. I was really happy to get her to agree that she would do this. It was a lot of work for she and Jeff both. Jeff did a fabulous job helping us hang, but more than that, getting the little wire on there that goes across the back that was always in the exact right place. Sounds like an easy thing, but when you're hanging 38 or 40 pictures, it's really important. So with that, I'm going to turn it over and let Pam do her thing.
Thank you very much. First, I wish to thank my husband, of course, and I want to thank Porter and Brooke and the Pole Photography Club. Many of you are probably members. And who else? Abby, Ashley, everyone who's had a part in helping get this together. And Cindy Van Horn, I don't want to forget Cindy, because we had a team together here on Sunday hanging for hours. And I was just sort of the grunt. Rain and Cindy put everything together, color-wise, animal-wise, set it all up, told Porter and Jeff where to hang it and how to hang it. It worked out beautifully. I like that kind of work. The slideshow playing behind me is just a compilation of one of our trips to Botswana. I'm not sure which one, but because we've gone several times and we're hoping to go again in a couple months, right, in June. Any questions or comments you may have are welcomed. And if I don't have an answer immediately, I will come back to you with an answer. How many of you have been to Africa? I thought so. I would think that everyone in Spring Island has either been to Africa once, twice, a number of times, or have plans to go and take family, children, grandchildren. And that was one of my dreams. The first time we went, we took our family. They were all much younger than they are now. And we were in England, and we went from England to Kenya over Christmas and New Year's, 1994, 95, or 95, 96. We couldn't quite get our thoughts together on that. So we traveled through with Abercrombie and Kent at that point in time, and it was more of a budget trip. And we got off at the airport, were picked up in Nairobi, taken to a A&K vehicle that was a VW bus. So, and then we drove through Kenya on this VW bus, in this VW bus. My children were ready to murder me by the end of the trip. But we'd always driven all over America as a family, and the kids were good travelers. So I thought, well, Kenya will be fine, Africa will be fine. We didn't realize Africa, Kenya especially, hardly has any real roads. It may have changed since then, we haven't been in a while. But the roads that they had were built by the British like 100 years before. And they'd, of course, given the country back to the natives, and there was no roadbed. And we were driving over dirt and going this way, and then up and over bumps, and then this way at 45, 50 miles an hour, which I was frightened for my children's lives. And I kept asking the driver, please don't go so fast. And he said, if I don't go fast, we will go over. So it was that dangerous. I mean, big trucks, there's no place, and they've made there was one stretch, Jeff, how long was it? About 5 miles? A young African native boy took it upon himself, because they don't have electricity, they don't have running water, they don't have the roads, so they don't have vehicles to go on the roads. He had a bicycle. He would drive by his bicycle from his home to this one stretch of the highway, fill in the holes. Every driver would stop and give him an envelope with money in it as a thank you. quite an enterprising young man. And we found ourselves at one point tracking a leopard that one of the guides had seen kill up in a tree and was telling our guide, and they're walkie-talkieing each other. We're all safe in this vehicle. We're trying to find it. We see these young children, probably about your age, a boy and a girl, and they had a small herd of cattle, calves, and a small herd of goats. And they were hunting, they were out there herding their animals, which was their job. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I wouldn't let my kids out like that, because who knows, the leopard might be there and might pounce on them. But it didn't, and they were fine. That was one of the first of many, many adventures we had. And I'm sure you all can share adventures too, and I hope you will before the end of this today. I began my relationship with photography when my family were all young, I think as many of us do. And I was following them around, catching shots whenever I could, and watching them grow up. And I used just little point and shoot cameras, various ones. Some of them worked at the time, but now the photographs have all faded because they weren't that good. But I kept going, and then I took, we lived in Cincinnati, my hometown at that point. If you have any questions about anything, just raise your hand. We moved from Cincinnati. Jeff worked for Procter & Gamble. We moved to upstate New York, a little town called Norwich, New York. Some of you may be familiar with that area. And it's between Binghamton and Syracuse. And we spent 8 years there. And that year I continued taking classes at night school in photography. And Santa brought me my first SLR, single lens reflex, for Christmas that year with a couple lenses. So then I was really, I felt really important with that camera. And that was the camera I took on our first trip to Africa. I shot 30 rolls of film, which, as many of you I'm sure have experienced, it's kind of scary taking your film through back then, but even more so now, because film can get ruined by the x-ray machines. And they always would say, well, just ask them to hand check it. Well, they don't always want to do that. Then they want to pull the film out to make sure that it's film. But mine all survived, and at that point in time, I had a job, a part-time job at a photo lab, QPC, in Windsor, England. So I was allowed, my boss allowed me to come in after hours and use all the machines and do all my photos and enlargements and everything like that, and it was great. I loved it. Then, after 8 years, Jeff and I and our youngest daughter moved to England, to Surrey, about 35 minutes out from southwest from the center of London. It took us 35, 40 minutes by the fast train into Waterloo. And so then I became much more serious about photography. I began taking Cities and Guilds photography courses that following spring. Has anyone ever heard of Cities and Guilds classes, period, in London? Well, that's an organization that Prince Philip was the president of for like 50 years. And I started taking courses there. I met one of my very best friends in the world there. She happened to be one of my photographic tutors. And my first course, which was Introduction to Color Photography, my camera died. Like 2 weeks into the 10-week course. And I thought, oh my God. So I had to find a camera shop. I had to go and decide what I wanted. So that's when I started buying Nikon, over there they call it Nikon cameras. My first one I think was an F90, which I love to this day. And then I bought a couple lenses, and that's one of the good things with Nikon or Canon. You can exchange lenses. So I've got lenses all the way from there, 1992, that still fit my cameras. Of course, now I've got the newer lenses, but still similar. So, oh, and I also have, I wanted to tell you this. Has anyone heard of Lens Baby? This is something good for all of the photographers, and you would love it because they've got the video part too now. Craig Strong a photographer in Portland, Oregon, photographed our eldest daughter's wedding up at Mount Hood, Timberline. And he was using this funny little lens. And I started talking with him. And he said, well, this is something I'm trying a mock-up of. It's called a lens baby. And it was like, what was it, Jeff? Vacuum tubing from a vacuum cleaner? And it bends. And you can go around corners and get all sorts of surreal effects. And now he just introduced another one. He's got many now, and I love them. And they're not expensive, and it's something that all photographers here might really want to invest in, one or two anyway. Because it gets a really soft focus. I mean, I can't recommend them enough. I was just reading about their new one coming out. That's what reminded me. So my favorite Africa gear to this day, I mean, it's changed over the years, but to this day, is my Nikon D4 or my Nikon D5, which are both full frame cameras. So what you see through the viewfinder is what you're taking a picture of. Whereas older cameras, you would see only a portion. So you'd see things grayed out around the edges and think you were getting that, but you weren't. So this is what I prefer. I use it with my main two lenses that I take to Africa now. I've tried other ones, but these are the ones I've settled on. I have an 18 to 200 millimeter Nikon lens, and I have a 50 to 500 millimeter Sigma lens. And I take a monopod, a lightweight titanium monopod, and I have a 150 to 600 lens, Sigma, but it's way too close. So we took it to Africa once, and it's not for Africa. It's for other places that are like around Spring Island that could use it. But you get too close to the animals in Africa. And so the 150 was too far, was too close. And the 600, I hardly ever needed to have that distance. You have to have, I would recommend a monopod rather than a tripod, because the tripod is much trickier to use. The monopod, you can move it around. And my Sherpa puts it over his shoulder and carries it for me. Dust protection is a major problem when you're photographing in Africa. I mean, the first 2 times we went, and I had cameras that couldn't clean themselves. I went to my shop in Portland, Oregon, and he said, what have you done with this camera? And I said, I went to Africa, or when I was shooting polo photography, it would get filled with dust from shooting the horses. So he said, please try to take better care of your camera. So I have a dust rain cover to cover my camera and my lens. And I put, when we're riding, going out shooting, I'll put my jacket over and a blanket even over that. When I'm not actively shooting, it tries to help keep the dust out. I would recommend that. I use my Toomey backpack as my camera bag because that works better than any camera bag I've ever had, personally. And cleaning gear is ultra important. Bulb blower to get the dust off, and lens tissues and liquid. I recommend that. I also have a photo vest I wear to carry the extra lens when I'm using one, although I try not to change them when we're out on a drive, because that's when you get the dust in the camera. I also have a Leica Velux 40, which I use for closer up work while I'm out. I had one when we went to Uganda, a new one. It wasn't the 40, I forget what it was, but we came back from one of our walks to look at the great apes. I went to put it down next to the table, dropped it. The first day we were out. Couldn't use it for the rest of the trip. Jeff is my spotter, my Sherpa. He carries his own smaller camera for his, his photo endeavors. The very angry elephant out on the wall charging us was one of his, because I had my big lens and I'm sitting there bouncing, and I couldn't. I said, Jeff, I can't turn around. Can you get your camera and see what you can get? And he just went click, click, and got 2 good shots. So I had to have that one in here. So after several years of classes with cities and guilds, I was chosen to receive a very special award, the Bronze Medal in Photography, which is the highest award for a person who is chosen as the best amateur photographer or the best amateur anything. They have all sorts of different courses. That year in the British Commonwealth worldwide. So 6 million people, I was very happily chosen to receive this medal, which is right here. Jeff made the frame. He's a master woodworker, many of you would know. It was made at the British Royal Mint. And it's the Cities and Guilds logo on the front, and then my name and date on the back. So I don't know, would anybody like to pass it around? Look at more closely at it. Well, pictures from it are at the beginning of the slideshow, but that was one of the most special days of my life. My husband, of course, was in America on a business trip. He couldn't come with me. I was allowed to bring one person to Buckingham Palace. He said, well, make Mandy go. Make Mandy go. How do you make a 17-year-old child go? I said, Jeff, it's her last day of high school. She's not going to go to Buckingham Palace on her last day of high school. So I asked my instructor, who's one of my best friends, as I mentioned, and she said, Pam, no one's ever asked me to do that, something like that before. I said, well, I'm asking you, would you like to go? She said, you don't know how much I'd like to go. She said, for an American, it probably doesn't mean that much, but for a Brit, it means everything. I said, are you kidding me? This is one of the most special days of my life, Teresa. So we had a very nice day. Now to my Africa. As I mentioned, our first trip, which I'd wanted to do since I was a young girl and saw an atlas that my parents had purchased. And my family didn't travel at all. My parents couldn't afford it. So I would just sit and dream of travel pages through the book. And Jeff did travel, but nothing like this. And when I first said, I want to go to Africa, he said, I don't want to go to Africa. And I said, well, I really want to go to Africa, at least once. And he said, okay, we'll go to Africa. And did you have fun? You got the bug too. And the children, besides almost mutinying and almost killing me as we were driving around all those days, loved it too. That was in, as I said, either 94, 95 or 95, 96. Our next trip was Jeff and I to Mozambique on what was supposed to be a dive trip, because we scuba dived as well. We used to scuba dive when we could. And it took 2 days to get there. We had to fly into Joburg, and then they had to take us out to the Garden District to stay overnight in a hotel because they said it was too unsafe to stay downtown. And when you drove along, I'm sure many of you have probably been there, to South Africa and to Joburg and to Nairobi. There's broken glass and barbed wire on all the walls around places. So we stayed there happily, and then we had another day, and they had a driver for us and took us out to see past the settlements, which is mile after mile of slum. And these poor hundreds of thousands of people have AIDS, have no work, have no fresh water. Sewage just runs down the middle of the road. So we went past all that, and then they took us to a Cheetah Conservancy, which was wonderful. So we got to pet a cheetah, and we got to, his most exciting part was we got to lift the cheetah. It was a male cheetah, big male cheetah. It was habituated, but still, he was a cheetah. Got to pick up his tail. It weighed a lot. And the spots are raised when you pet it. So we got to our scuba place, and it wasn't a scuba place, they wanted bone fishermen. They didn't want scuba divers. So that was kind of a bust, but we're glad we went because we got to see the cheetah. Then our next trip was Tanzania. I think we did, the one to Mozambique we did through a dive company. The one to Tanzania was again with, I believe, A&K. Looking at Jeff. That was in 2003. We did several camps. I think we were on the verge of one of our wars. I'm not sure which one. Desert Storm or one of the wars. So we were at a camp, and most people had canceled because they were afraid America was getting into a war. We were there, and we felt safer than we probably would have felt at home. And we were at the camp in Tirangiri Swamp. It's a huge swamp, lots and lots of elephants and birds and all sorts of wonderful creatures. We were there for 3 days, the only people in the camp, because everyone else had canceled. And then the manager's partner's father had a heart attack, so she had to leave. So we had him to ourselves, and he said, where do you want to go? We'll go and explore this, we'll go explore that. I have a photograph of Jeff with his pink sweater over his head, because I'm normally killed by mosquitoes. They eat me alive. Jeff was the favorite of tsetse flies. And the manager said, well, they're just tsetse flies. And we said, wait a minute, don't those, he said, oh, they give you sleeping sickness. And we said, doesn't that kill you? He said, no, you just sleep a lot for a while, and then you're okay. So what else do we have? Oh, I know. We went from that camp then to Ngorongoro Crater and stayed at Crater Lodge. So we were up high looking down. It was just beautiful. And I didn't make the same mistake of driving. We were flying that time. So we spent a couple days at Crater Lodge, which is unbelievable. If you ever get a chance to go there, I recommend it. You have a butler. You have a Maasai to walk you to dinner and back, because they have a herd of bison that are very dangerous. So, but Jeff loved it because, I don't know if your men like to spend a fair amount of time in the loo, but mine does. And they had a little door looking out the window, and you could see all the animals outside, right outside. It was awesome. And then we were there 2 nights. The second day we went down into the crater, and it's like a giant bowl of wildlife that all developed, grew up there, and continue to thrive. So we drove around, had a wonderful time. Then our driver was calling up and saying, well, I'm bringing them back soon. We got back to our room. There was a hot tub, copper tub, filled with warm water and rose petals for me, which was really fun. We had our own butler, and you came back to a port, big fireplace, heated blankets. It was heaven.
Just like home.
Jeff turned to me and said, I don't want to know how much we paid for this place. Because it was, folded in with the rest of the trip. It was fun. And then the day we were leaving, we went and got in the plane, the little plane, and our pilot came out, he got in, and it was very kind of misty, and he started to try to turn it on, and nothing happened. And then after a couple minutes, we thought, oh no, we do not want to have to drive. He got the information, the guide out of the glove box, and he's looking through it, and he went out, he popped the top, and Jeff went out with him, and they were kind of looking around. He said, I think we might have to drive. We said, no, please try again. So he came in, and he went tap, tap to the gauge, and it went on.
Perfect.
That was fun, one of our adventures. So our next trip was to Egypt in 2005, and the Red Sea at the end. We got to go on sunboat, going up the Nile, and we by that point in time, we had British passports as well as our American passports. And when we had written down, we usually travel on our British passports going from England down to Africa and places like that. So we had signed in on our British passports. So they sat us with a table of Brits. And there were all these Americans, and they were wondering, oh, why are you with the Brits? You're American. It just worked out that way. It was fun. We enjoyed it. It was so crowded. I had to use all of my photographic skill to take shots like this and not have converging verticals, be able to get a view of the real beauty of the temples and pyramids. And then I'd pan down and look at this, all the people, much tighter than we are here. But it was a great trip. We got to go to Egypt once. We've tried 2 other times, and people were killed, and so. Oh, can you still hear me?
Yes.
I put it down. Sorry. The Red Sea was freezing because the same time that's not too crowded, and using the Nile as transport, it is frigid. I mean, I almost got hypothermia. We did one dive with a crazy Italian dive master who had very thick dive skin on, so he could stay under forever. And he kept us under. You have to follow your dive master when you don't know where you're going. We were under for an hour. We came up, and I don't think I've ever been so cold in my life. Jeff took me very carefully, sat me down on a rock in the sun, and tried to rub me up to get warm. So that was the only dive we did in the Red Sea. But it was beautiful underwater. So our next trip was Botswana again in 2009. We've done lots of trips in between these, but they've been mostly dive trips, underwater photography, things like that. In the Indian Ocean, we have a favorite place we go to in the Indian Ocean, and the Caribbean and Palau once with our daughter, our youngest daughter, which was great. Then in 2011, we went to the Galapagos and Machu Picchu. How many of you have been to the Galapagos? Machu Picchu? Have you hiked? No, we didn't hike. I wish we could have, but no. And we landed at Cusco and got off the plane and started to walk. You walk around the inside of the airport, and I felt really woozy. And it's, I don't know, does anybody know how high the airport is there?
11,000 feet.
How many?
11.
Okay. I thought I was saying 10, and Jeff said, oh, I think it's more like 16.
No, it's Salcantay Pass is 16. I hiked over it.
Oh, wow.
That was thin.
Yeah. Good for you.
I was younger.
Did I turn it off?
You said you had set it down.
No, I set it down, but I picked it back up.
Oh, you did? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
You can't hear?
No, I got right.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, please tell me. If you can't hear me, I want you to hear me. Anyway, we were very lucky. We had Jim Carrey's guide. He had just worked with Jim Carrey and his father like a week before then. So he was so much fun as a guide. We said, is Jim Carrey fun? He said, he is really funny, but he's also very much in favor of the environment. He and his father both, which warmed my heart. I love Jim Carrey anyway. And he took us to Machu Picchu and taught us to go the opposite way of most tourists. He went with us the first day, and we followed him, and then the next morning, we got up at 5 a.m. and went the opposite way. So we went up to the sun gate of the steps when everybody was coming down from the hikers. Then our next trip, anyone have any questions so far?
Was that a giraffe skull that was just up there? Well, 4 pictures back.
Up here?
Yes.
I don't know, I didn't see it.
Okay.
What was up there?
It was a skull.
Oh, hyena? Yeah, lots of hyenas. Anything else? Yet? Okay, so Galapagos and Machu Picchu, I would love to go back to Machu Picchu. The Galapagos were lovely, but too overcrowded. And it was like you're walking along on these paths, because you're only allowed to keep on the paths, understandably, because there's so many people. Look, and here's a group of tourists, here's a group of tourists, here's a group of tourists. It was hard to get photographs without people in them. And the animals are just sort of lying there looking like, oh, here comes some more. I think they could do a better job in the Galapagos. But then we went from there to Machu Picchu, and even though it was crowded, it was a spiritual time. Then the next trip is also 2011. We went to Kenya, Zambia, and Victoria Falls. It was a bumper crop year. Kenya, we went to, I don't know which camps. Yeah, we're bad. We should write down. Jeff writes dive logs when we scuba dive, but when we're traveling to camps, we should write down all the camps so we can remember. And so we could tell people if you want to know what camps. I know a few camps that we loved. You probably all, we could put huge lists together with everybody. we went to Victoria Falls, landed in Livingston, the pilot got permission to fly over the falls coming in, so I got photographs down at the falls. Then we landed at Livingston on a regular jet, passenger jet, and Jeff left his Kindle, which he's done many times. He left it under some newspaper, so they let us bring bottles of water on that flight, and bananas, and a newspaper, but then he left it. Joys of travel. We loved, Victoria Falls was very fun to see, very fun to tour. There might be some pictures of Victoria Falls in here, I'm not sure. And we got Zambia, we were there for 2 days and went on a boat. Was that the Chobe River, Jeff, or was that later?
Yep.
That's the Chobe River? We went on a boat ride trip on the Chobe River, which is way down from camp. We were at Chobe Chuaro, which was like staying in a modern hotel, except we weren't allowed to go out the door without a guard because they said they had black mambas. They had air conditioning and everything. That's not what we want in our African experience. So we seek out the camps that are maybe in place. Oh, this is our young elephant. The first time we were walking out of our tent to breakfast, and he was right there with his butt up against the fence. And Jeff said, let's just try to sneak past him. And he flipped around. We didn't know an elephant could move that fast. And so he scared Jeff, said, well, maybe we should go back in and call for help. So we went back in and called for help, and pretty soon our guide came down with one of the other guys. They chased the elephant off. Later that same day, we got back from our morning drive. Jeff said, I'm gonna go lay down. And I was online trying to send off an email to the kids. I saw, here comes the elephant chasing Jeff. So I called to the manager and said, I think it's Brian. I said, Brian, the elephant's after Jeff again. So he grabbed a couple guys and they went out. It was an elephant that was either a preteen or just barely into being a teenager. And they said he was a naughty boy. So the herd had chased him out and he was trying to make his own way, so he was hanging around the camp. He didn't go after Jeff again though. That was our first time to go when we went to Chiefs, wasn't it, Jeff? This guy. Zambia, Jeff was taking a nap and we had met some lovely Mexican people, and they offered us a trip to a village close by. And so we all went, and it was a matriarchal society. You had to go and give obeisance to the matriarch. Her father had chosen her. I guess he could pass from male to female and back, and that was a lovely experience. Then we got a tour around, and there were people living on pretty subsistence level, but they were very happy. They had their homes, like shacks. Again, no electricity, no running water, but this one family, a man and wife, young people, were building a straw loo, and their baby, they had like a 1-year-old child in swaddling clothes sitting on the dirt. And I thought, okay, we were kept in because there were black mambas. Their little boys just allowed to sit here in the dirt. The things that affect you. And the children were so dear, and they came, it was pre-COVID, of course, but I had a little boy, so sweet, came and held my hand, and I was thinking, what is on his hand? His nose was running, but he was so dear. And they all wanted soccer shirts. I mean, some of them wanted pencils. A lot of people say, bring them pencils, but these guys wanted soccer shirts. And we got to go and see where the women did their work and where the women ran the village, which was very interesting. I loved it. So that was that trip. Then the next one was 2013 to South Africa and Kirkman Camp, which is an old established camp that was lovely, but it wasn't tents. It was cottages, but it was the old style. So we stayed there a couple days, and our first drive out, we were driving along. Suddenly, this large female leopard who was in estrus and wanted a man This is what our guide told us. He said, she needs a man. Because she was, making it sound like, honey, where are you? Come to me. The next day they told us that she found a man. They saw she and her man leave the compound together at dawn. And that was our first, we're in this vehicle up high and looking down, there is a young, lilac-breasted roller. There's a young worker there in an open tractor driving up the path, and this leopard is going right past him. He's kind of like, whoa, get me out of here. But she didn't bother him. We saw her later too. A couple days later into our trip, she was at the bottom of a tree. He was up on a branch and had a dead impala. So he wanted nothing to do with her, and she was kind of like, honey, let me up or come down. And then that same day we saw, on another drive, we saw 4 cheetah brothers and 1 female. And that female just wanted to be left alone. And they told us she's in heat, but only one of the brothers would take her. But the rest are helping keep her, captive for 4 or 5 days. I got a photograph of her leaning up against her rear end against the tire. See, and that one on South Africa, Jeff, is that the one we went to Cape Town too? I think?
Wine.
Wine. Well, yeah, we went for wine in Cape Town, but also touristy things. We had a lovely time at that. I'm sure most of you have gone to Africa, have been probably to Cape Town and the wines, and I'd like to go back. I think we've been back one other time, but we went to Nelson Mandela. What is it? The island? Robben Island. We went for a tour of Robben Island. And to think that that poor man was imprisoned for 26 years, I believe, and that he could keep his personality and his resolve was just so amazing. When we went past, it was once a leper's island. And they had a cemetery. Have you seen, what is it? What's the poem? The movie?
The rugby one?
The rugby one.
The one where it's a famous line from a poem.
Victorious or something.
Yeah. Anyway, it reminded me very much of that.
Invictus.
Invictus. Yes. Then our next trip, I think we did some more things in Cape Town. We did a lot of touring and visiting. We were told from the hotel we were staying in, they took us to a restaurant. They said, we made a reservation for you at a restaurant that's one of the top restaurants in the world. We drove and drove and drove through slums. It was getting dark. We got to a place that was all surrounded with fence and guards. And they took us in, and it was a delicious restaurant. We found out that it was owned by a best friend of a chef we knew in London, who had not Waterside Inn, the Fat Duck. If any of you have ever been to the Fat Duck. And we told him, we got the chef, we said, we think your food here is better than his. And he said, oh, I can't wait to tell him that. Jeff got sick that day, so he couldn't really enjoy the food that I did. So our next trip, 2014, was to Namibia. And Jeff would love to tell you that we got to step 1 foot, we'll walk around a little bit, in Angola. Our boat guide, who took us up the river, stopped there and let us get out and walk around a little bit and relieve ourselves. And Namibia. Have any of you been to Namibia yet? Did you do the Skeleton Coast Safari? We loved it. Jeff got to fly the plane for 30 minutes. I love Namibia and the Skeleton Coast Safari. You just fly down a small plane. It was mostly full of food for him to take to each of his camps. He was a white Namibian. He and his brothers were considered white Namibians. They were adopted by a chief of the Himba people, and they were given these 3 or 4 concessions, where they could have a camp. And so they had this business, but he was getting old enough, wasn't gonna be able to fly by himself anymore. But the plane is too small to have all the supplies and enough people to keep the business going. So, when did you go?
08.
Oh wait, yes.
Okay,
Our
Well.
child was in Peace Corps over there.
awesome.
Otherwise, we would have never gone to
I know.
Namibia, but it was awesome.
We drove around Namibia for a week.
Well, I recommend it. Jeff and I would recommend a trip for anybody to Namibia. Although it was so dry when we were there, it was such a desert. It's time to wrap up already? Time to wrap up. So I'll just quickly tell you. So then after that trip, we've been to Botswana again in 2016, 2017. We went to Uganda to see the great apes in 2017. And you're not supposed to touch them, but they come up to you, that's different. And you know, Jeff was looking at a black back. I was looking at a black back with a lot of other people. And Jeff said, Pam, come over here. I came over across the path, and this gray back, a young, going to be a black back, came rushing out and shouldered me. So I considered that I was touched by a great ape. Then, let's see, the next trip was 2019 with 12 of our family members. Because now, since that first trip in 1995, our children all got married, and we've got all these grandbabies, and that was my next bucket list item that I really wanted. I hope to be able to take the other 2 that were still left out. And the little one at that point was 8 years old, and he cried so hard when we left our last camp that he sobbed. It was like our flight to Maui, and he cried the whole time. And he's the one who loves Africa the most besides me. He and one of my sons, middle son. But there's an animal out there that, does anybody know what a pangolin is? He wanted to see, the first camp we were at, our guide, Oren, asked the children, what would you like to see? And Evan said, I would like to see a pangolin. We've never seen a pangolin up until that time. Oren said, Evan, I think I might know where there's a pangolin. And he took us right to a pangolin. And we all got to get off the vehicle and touch it. And they're the sweetest, most docile little animals. And they're being slaughtered for their scales. And it's a horrible thing. But,
Have a picture out there?
yeah. And everybody says, what's this scaly animal? They can't, I think, did you say, somebody said they look like they might be related to armadillo, somewhere down the line. Not really, but kind of. Yeah. And their scales are like fingernails, aren't they? I believe. They're lovely. Okay, and after that trip, I went to Morocco in January of 2020, came back to England, then back to America on February 9th, and the world ended. Travel with COVID. So I hope COVID is over now, or getting to be over, and that we'll be able to all travel again soon. Thank you. Any questions?
Either about the art you've seen or from Pam. She's gonna be around here, and so she'll be out. If you-
Favorite country in Africa?
Botswana, without a doubt. The people are treated so well, they're educated well, women are respected, the natives are given power over the camps. They run the camps and do a really good job. I think, would you agree, Jeff?
And from a photographic standpoint?
Oh, I love Botswana from photographic as well,
Mhm.
but I mean, I love South Africa photographically. Table Mountain, and just the sea there, and going down to the tip.
See the penguins, yeah.
Is there any place you haven't been yet that you want to go to in Africa?
No, what do you think? Is there any place that we haven't been to that we'd like to go to in Africa? We keep going back to Botswana because we love it so much. What?
The Congo. You said the
Congo, yeah. I think Rwanda, I think I'd like Rwanda better than Uganda for the great apes, because we booked to go to Bwindi Impenetrable Forest, to Sanctuary Gorilla Camp, thinking it's the only camp that's within this great forest. We got there, it's about 100 yards inside the gate. They're doing major construction right next to it. Because I was hoping maybe a gorilla would come, an ape would come through. No way. And then the army was practicing. No. Anyway.
Thank all y'all.
Thank you.